The year is 1099. A city older than memory falls in a single day. Jerusalem, holy to three faiths, home to millions of prayers, is soaked in blood. The Crusaders have arrived, and they have not come in peace. Streets that once echoed with the call to prayer now run silent. Mosques are burned, families torn apart, a civilization humiliated. For 88 years, the wound festers. 88 years of occupation, of grief, of waiting. Then, out of the sands of Egypt and Syria, a man rises. Not a king by birth, not a conqueror by ambition. A man who believed that justice, not vengeance, would reclaim what had been lost. His name? Saladin Yusuf ibn Ayyub. The world would come to know him simply as Saladin. This is the story of how one man united a fractured world and gave Jerusalem back to Islam.
To understand Saladin, you must first understand the chaos he inherited. The Muslim world of the 12th century was not one world. It was 100 kingdoms at war with each other. The Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad held spiritual authority, but no real power. The Fatimid Caliphate in Cairo was Shia and deeply distrusted by Sunni rulers. Syria was a patchwork of feuding princes, each more afraid of his neighbor than of the Crusaders. And the Crusaders? They were not a temporary nuisance. They had built stone castles, established kingdoms, put down roots. The county of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the county of Tripoli. 4 Crusader states, permanent, fortified, and growing stronger. Into this world, in the year 1137 or 1138, in the city of Tikrit, in modern-day Iraq, Saladin was born. His family were Kurdish. His father, Najm ad-Din Ayyub, was a military commander of influence and reputation. From childhood, Saladin absorbed 2 things, the Quran and the art of war. But it was not war that shaped his character most. It was justice. He was raised in a tradition that said power without righteousness is just tyranny wearing a crown. That lesson would guide every decision of his life. Saladin's real education began under his uncle, Asad ad-Din Shirkuh. Shirkuh was one of the most feared military commanders in the Muslim world. He served Nur ad-Din, the ruler of Syria, and one of the few Muslim leaders who actually thought beyond his own borders. Nur ad-Din had a vision: unite Islam, retake Jerusalem. It was Nur ad-Din who first gave Saladin's ambitions a direction. In 1163, the opportunity came. Egypt, ruled by the weakened Fatimid Caliphate, became a battleground. Both the Crusaders and Nur ad-Din wanted control of it. Shirkuh led 3 military expeditions into Egypt. Each time, young Saladin rode beside him. In battle, Saladin was fearless. In counsel, he was sharp. In victory, he was generous. Officers noticed. Enemies noticed. When Shirkuh finally secured Egypt in 1169 and became its vizier, he brought Saladin with him. Then, just 2 months later, Shirkuh died. And Saladin, barely 30 years old, stepped into his place. The young Kurdish commander was now the most powerful man in Egypt. No one expected what came next.
Most men given power become drunk on it. Saladin used it as a tool. His first challenge was Egypt itself. The Fatimid Caliphate was Shia. The population was largely Sunni. The military was fractured with factions. Saladin moved with precision, not with purges, but with policy. He replaced the Fatimid call to prayer, quietly restoring the Sunni tradition. He built schools, madrasas, and mosques. He invested in the people. He reorganized the military, bringing in Turkic and Kurdish officers who were loyal to competence, not to clan. He paid his soldiers well, fed them well, trained them constantly. And he did something that shocked the Crusaders. He began to build a navy. Egypt had a coastline. The Crusaders controlled the sea. Saladin intended to change that. By 1171, the Fatimid Caliph died, and Saladin did not name a successor. The Fatimid Caliphate, after 2 centuries, simply ended. Egypt was now Sunni, and Egypt was now Saladin's. When Nur ad-Din, his master, died in 1174, Saladin did not mourn for long. He moved north into Syria. Within months, Damascus opened its gates to him. Within years, Aleppo, Mosul, and the cities of the Jazira followed. One by one, the fractured kingdoms of the Muslim world were knitting together, not by conquest alone, but by Saladin's extraordinary ability to make people believe in something larger than themselves. The jihad to reclaim Jerusalem was no longer a dream. It was becoming a plan. While Saladin was building his empire, the Crusader states were tearing themselves apart. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was in crisis. King Baldwin IV, known to history as the Leper King, was dying slowly, eaten alive by leprosy. He was brilliant, brave, utterly determined, but he could not last. And around him circled men of far smaller virtue. There was Reynald of Chatillon, a reckless, brutal knight, who seemed to actively want war. He broke every truce Saladin offered, attacked Muslim caravans, threatened to raid Mecca and Medina itself. Then there was Guy of Lusignan, ambitious, weak, and deeply unqualified to be king. The Crusader court was a nest of rivalries. Every nobleman pursued his own interests. The military orders, the Templars, and the Hospitallers were powerful but unpredictable. Saladin watched all of this carefully. He signed truces with the Crusaders and kept them, because peace gave him time to grow stronger. But Reynald of Chatillon made peace impossible. In 1187, he attacked a major Muslim caravan traveling under a truce. It was a direct, deliberate provocation. Saladin's response was measured but absolute. He sent a message: "Return the prisoners and the goods." Reynald refused. The truce was dead. Saladin raised his army, the largest Muslim force in generations. It was time.
July 3rd, 1187.
The hills of Galilee shimmer in the summer heat. Saladin's army, over 30,000 strong, has surrounded the Crusader forces near the Sea of Galilee. The Crusader army, led by the disastrous Guy of Lusignan, has made a fatal error. They have marched across a desert, in summer, in full armor, and now they are surrounded. Saladin had engineered this with extraordinary precision. He knew the Crusaders would march toward the springs of Hattin, the only water source for miles. He had positioned his forces to cut them off. He had set fire to the dry grass. Smoke choked the Crusader ranks. Thirst, smoke, exhaustion, and then the full force of Saladin's cavalry. The Battle of the Horns of Hattin lasted one shattering day. The Crusader army, the backbone of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, was annihilated. King Guy of Lusignan was captured. The true cross, the holiest relic of the Crusaders, was taken, and Reynald of Chatillon was brought before Saladin. Saladin offered Guy a cup of iced water, a gesture of mercy for a captured king. Guy passed the cup to Reynald. Saladin stopped him. "This man will not drink my water, for I have not granted him mercy." Then Saladin drew his sword and executed Reynald personally. The man who had broken every truce,
who had threatened Mecca and Medina, met his end there. But for every other prisoner, Saladin ordered mercy. No massacres, no torture. The Crusader army was shattered. Jerusalem lay virtually undefended, and Saladin turned his face toward the holy city.
September 20th, 1187. Saladin's army reaches the walls of Jerusalem. Inside, 60,000 civilians, a handful of knights. No real army left. The defender was Balian of Ibelin, a nobleman of extraordinary courage who had been given permission by Saladin himself to enter the city to collect his family. Instead, Balian found himself the last commander of a doomed city. He knighted every man who could hold a sword. He melted down silver from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to pay defenders. He did everything a man could do. It was not enough. The siege lasted 12 days. On October 2nd, 1187, the 27th of Rajab in the Islamic calendar, Jerusalem surrendered. Now came the moment the world was watching. 88 years earlier, when the Crusaders took Jerusalem, they had massacred the population. Muslims, Jews, and Christians alike were slaughtered in the streets. The historian Ibn al-Athir wrote that the blood was ankle-deep. What would Saladin do? He entered the city on foot. He gave the order, no looting, no killing, no destruction of Christian holy sites. Every Christian who could pay a ransom of 10 dinars would go free. For those who could not pay, Saladin's own brother stepped forward and paid the ransom for 10,000 of them. Saladin himself paid for thousands more. Christian priests were allowed to keep the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Eastern Christians, who had lived under Crusader rule, were allowed to stay. Even many Western Crusaders were allowed to leave safely. The contrast was not lost on the world. Saladin had reconquered Jerusalem and shown the world what conquest could look like when guided by principle rather than rage. Pope Gregory VIII, upon hearing the news, wept and called for a Third Crusade. Europe was not finished. The fall of Jerusalem shook the Christian world to its core. 3 of the most powerful kings in Europe answered the call. Frederick Barbarossa, Holy Roman Emperor, ruler of Germany, a legend of the medieval world. Philip II of France, shrewd, calculating, dangerous. And Richard I of England, Richard the Lionheart. Barbarossa never made it. He drowned crossing a river in Anatolia. His army collapsed without him. But Philip and Richard arrived, and Richard the Lionheart proved to be everything the Crusades had always promised and feared. The Siege of Acre began in 1189. It lasted 2 years. Saladin threw everything he had at the city, trying to relieve the garrison inside. He could not break the Crusader siege. In July 1191, Acre fell. Richard then committed an act of savagery that history has never fully forgiven. 3,000 Muslim prisoners, soldiers who had surrendered under a negotiated agreement, were marched out and executed. Saladin, watching from the hills, could do nothing. When he heard the news, witnesses said he wept with rage. The war between Richard and Saladin was unlike anything the era had seen. 2 extraordinary commanders, 2 completely different philosophies. Richard fought with terrifying momentum. His charge at the Battle of Arsuf was one of the most devastating cavalry actions of the medieval age. Saladin fought with patience, strategy, and the knowledge that time was on his side. Richard won battles, but he could not take Jerusalem. He came within sight of the holy city twice. Both times he turned back. He knew, even if he took Jerusalem, he could not hold it. Richard needed to go home. His kingdom in England was in chaos. Saladin needed peace. His own empire was strained after years of constant war. In September 1192, the two sides signed the Treaty of Jaffa. Jerusalem would remain in Muslim hands. Christian pilgrims would have free access to the holy sites. The coast, from Tyre to Jaffa, would remain Crusader territory. It was not a total victory for either side, but Saladin had held Jerusalem, and that was enough.
History remembers Saladin as a warrior, but those who knew him remembered something else. He was a man who gave away almost everything he owned. When he died, his treasury contained 47 silver dirhams and 1 gold dinar. Not enough to pay for his own funeral. He had given it all away. Richard the Lionheart, his greatest enemy, sent his personal physician to treat Saladin when the Sultan fell ill during the siege. And when Richard's horse was killed in battle, Saladin sent him a replacement. These were not acts of weakness. They were acts of a man who understood that how you fight matters as much as whether you win. He prayed 5 times a day. He fasted. He studied. He read poetry and wrote letters in beautiful Arabic prose. He was famous for his patience. Soldiers said he never lost his temper in battle, and he never broke a promise. In a century defined by broken oaths and endless betrayals, that alone made him extraordinary. On March 4th, 1193, Saladin died in Damascus. He was 55 years old. He had led armies across 3 continents. He had united a fractured Muslim world. He had recaptured Jerusalem without a massacre. He had fought Richard the Lionheart to a standstill. And he died with nothing, because everything he had given away. His funeral was a scene of genuine grief. Soldiers who had fought with him for decades wept openly. The people of Damascus lined the streets. Even Christian chroniclers, men who had spent their careers depicting Muslims as enemies, struggled to write about his death without admiration. The historian Baha ad-Din, who knew Saladin personally, wrote, "I never saw him turn away a petitioner empty-handed if he had anything to give." 800 years later, Saladin remains one of the most studied and admired military commanders in human history, not because of the battles he won, but because of how he won them. He showed the world that strength and mercy are not opposites, that a conqueror can be just, that faith, when lived with integrity, can move mountains and liberate cities. Jerusalem had been lost for 88 years. It took one man, one extraordinary, principled, relentless man, to bring it home. And his name echoes still. Saladin. You are watching War and Military History, where every conflict has a cause, every border has a cost, and every war leaves something behind. Subscribe and stay with us, because history is never truly over.